Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session, and it's nice to be back here. So I've been in Jaipur several times over the years, and I was thinking this morning, it's interesting to see how the topics we discuss have changed over time, particularly the topics out here on the Great Lawn. They tend to be quite topical and related to sort of like hot button issues of the time. So when I first came here, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, we did a panel up here called The Global Soul, and we talked a lot about globalization. China is a perennial topic. Last year I wasn't here, but I think there was at least one panel on Me Too. And so it seems fitting that today we're talking about big tech, AI, surveillance, big data, and all the other evils, both real and perceived, associated with technology, because those seem to be very much the sort of the issues of the day, and I think, you know, in many ways, receptacles and vehicles for many other societal, economic, cultural, and political anxieties. I think that 2019, in a way, these issues have been bubbling for a while, but I think 2019 was the year when the public and equally important regulators and lawmakers really started sort of waking up to these issues and really started being concerned, and in the case of regulators and policymakers, really taking action on them. So I'm not going to do a long intro, because of course you're here to hear our panelists. I just want to say that it's interesting to note how quickly this narrative has shifted, because it really wasn't very long ago, you know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, where the narrative surrounding technology was very, very different from the narrative we have today. If you think of the Arab Spring, which was, I guess, about 7 years ago, at that point, you know, technology was seen as an enabler of the common man. You know, it was going to bring down democracy. It was going to bring down dictatorship and usher in democracy. And that narrative has really shifted on its head quite rapidly. And I think one of the things we'll be talking about today is how and why that happened. So let me start. What I want to do initially is sort of get into some foundational, or sort of get into some definitions from the panel, and then we can move into sort of solutions to the problem. And Marcus, I thought I would start with you. As I was saying, this sort of concern about technology seems very broad, very diffuse to me. It encompasses a lot of different issues, everything from concern about our kids' attention spans, to our politics, to inequality. I mean, what is it that we're so worried about here? What is it that makes people so anxious about technology these days?
I think the principal word in our title is about surveillance. I think people are very concerned that their privacy, that seemed to be able to be easily protected by the actions that you made, now suddenly people are finding that they're getting advertisements for things that they just talked about to their wife very innocently in the kitchen, and then suddenly up pops an advert saying, you know, do you want a flight to Krakow? And you only talked to your wife about this. And so is this just random, or is this about suddenly people knowing a lot more about you than you actually think they do? And I think this is one of the important things about having a session like this, because I think it's very important that people have knowledge about quite how much data they're just leaving in their trail as they walk through the digital world. And I just don't think people are quite aware of how much information they're giving away about themselves because of digital data. And so that's, I think, been the real change that's happened in the last few years, is that because we're online so much, the amount of data that's being produced is extraordinary. I think in 2 days we produce more data today than data that's been produced since the beginning of time to the year 2003. So that's the transformation of a sort of analog human world to suddenly us creating a very rich digital world. Right. In fact, that's the reason, I've written a book that we're going to talk about on Sunday about machine learning and the creative arts. But the reason that machine learning, why algorithms are able to mutate, change, and adapt to become so powerful, is it's a little bit like an algorithm in the past was a child that was not given anywhere to play. And so, of course, it doesn't develop language, it doesn't develop intelligence. Now we suddenly have such a rich digital environment that there's a world for algorithms to go and play in, many visuals tagged by us, and this is why suddenly machine learning, which is an idea very much several decades ago, has suddenly become possible because there is this rich digital world which we're creating for free. We don't realize that, in fact, we give data away.
So data, so sort of
services.
big data is one of the issues. John, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my one-word answer to what should we worry about is China. Because there, if you read the Chinese, it's freely published, the State Plan for Machine Learning and Artificial Intelligence, it's imagining a world in which these new techniques are used for complete surveillance, complete control, and it explicitly mentions pensions, healthcare, judicial systems, educational systems, and obviously the police force and security system. China has a computer system called Skynet that processes 1.4 billion faces through its system, and it's linked to a police computer that uses health records of things like takeaway deliveries, everywhere people have moved, everywhere their movements are tracked by facial recognition. And it's explicitly imagining this is a new form of state control. And that's the worst case scenario of where the trends in this extraordinary slipstream of data that we all generate, combined with the arriving new discoveries in machine learning and artificial intelligence, expansion of computer power added to facial recognition. And we don't have to imagine the dystopian outcome of it because it's already present in a place like Xinjiang, where you have algorithmic processes used to identify, in quotes, radicals for attending mosque too often, things like that, for having children with Islamic names, and for, in the case of one instance, a publisher of Uyghur language texts who was jailed because the books he'd printed had too low a percentage of Chinese original words. And out of a population of 12 million Uyghurs, you have 1.5 million who are currently in or have spent time in re-education camps. So the possible worst-case outcome for this isn't something we have to imagine. It's something that's already here, and we have to think about what the implications are for us and how we act to prevent it.
So, I mean, that actually leads to one of my next questions, because one of the interesting things, you just cited China as a possible worst-case scenario. I mean, my understanding, and I could be wrong, is that the Chinese are not as concerned about this stuff at the moment as many people are in the West. Like, one of the things I wanted to ask Jaspreet is a lot of the sort of anxiety around tech and concerns about tech seem largely, not only, but largely to be emanating from the US and Europe at the moment. And I wanted to ask you, Jaspreet, because you've worked in India, A, whether you agree with that, and B, whether there are other concerns in India, but also if you care to comment more generally in the non-Western world, just to add, like, we hear a lot about this notion of the great decoupling, where sort of China is developing its own internet and heading down its own path, which would suggest that some of the anxieties that might emerge would also be different.
Okay, thanks, Akash. Three points broadly in answer to the question you asked, and taking off from what first Marcus said about privacy, and then what John talked about China. Now, first of all, I agree with you. Privacy is not as big a deal in India, culturally, as it is in the Western world. So, if you're in an elevator, for example, there's no concept of space, and therefore privacy. You're sitting in a train, and the first thing they're going to ask you is, how much is your salary? So the concept of privacy in India is very different from the concept of privacy in the Western world. And so, very frankly, for 5 rupees, I'm going to sell my privacy and my information and my data. And that's rarely been the case. And so the Indian concern in the Indian customer, consumer, person does not really come from that my privacy is getting invaded, but it has started coming because we have started seeing how data can actually move things which influence you at a very basic level, elections, for example, okay, or the polarization, of the society in general, and how much are all these different social networks and WhatsApp and everything that also in the end use your data and kind of communicate so simply with each other, how that's going to. And so I think the concerns here and then people stealing your money because they can get into your accounts, etc., is I think the bigger concern rather than my privacy getting invaded. That's one. Two is, very frankly, I think the Chinese culture is also very similar. Okay, in the sense that they don't really care that much about privacy, and then then added to the fact that they're the party and the government reigns supreme. And so one of the reasons why this quote-unquote decoupling and where China is kind of coming in is because China has this massive fount of data, which has really no regulation on it. Okay, and so huge number of phones, 1.5 billion people, everyone even paying alms to a beggar using mobile payments, and therefore the data which is kind of coming out, and then you can do so much with it. And so these data-first companies which are getting born in China, frankly, no other country has a hope to replicate those. And why this decoupling bit is real is that if you kind of go back into history, and we've had lots of sessions on geopolitics today, for example, the West built itself on 2 or 3 large things. The ocean trade, for example. But one of those large things was oil, and just owning oil. Now, you've heard this concept of data being the new oil. In fact, I disagree. Oil, frankly, was nothing in its power compared to what data has. And there are many other reasons why data is far, far, far more powerful than oil ever was. And what China is doing is that its ascent actually is coming from using this new, more powerful oil, which is data. And that's obviously started creating all these problems, the Huawei, the 5G stuff, all the things that we see. And so geopolitics, as we're going forward, is actually going to be shaped by data. And there's very clearly a big winner there because of the inherent advantages that it has.
Right. So I want to ask you, you mentioned polarization as one of the concerns. Obviously that, although neither of you mentioned it, that's very much is a concern in the Western world too. And that kind of leads to my next question, which is, polarization, political polarization is obviously a real issue and a real problem, but aren't we being a little bit unfair to technology in blaming? It seems to me that we're a little bit beating up on technology here and blaming technology for many of our social ills. And that a lot of this sort of current anxiety about technology, in the US, it's sort of redirected Trump rage, or in the EU and certainly in Britain, it's redirected Brexit rage. No, I'm not denying, of course, that social media played a role in it, but at the end of the day, Facebook did not elect Trump. And I thought, John, you wrote a piece, kind of scathing piece about Facebook, so you would be a good person to throw this question at.
I think Trump would say that Facebook helped elect Trump. And one of the things that the Republicans did is they had an embedded person from Facebook actually on the campaign. Brad Pascale, who ran the campaign from San Antonio in Texas. And the main thing they did was listen to what he said. And the Democrats had an equivalent person, and they didn't listen. And they ran all sorts of new kinds of campaign using the tools that Facebook offer to target groups and to do what's called A/B testing. They repeatedly generated different kinds of ads. And some days in some individual congressional constituencies, they ran 500 different kinds of targeted ad, just trying to see which one worked and then doubling down on that. Facebook themselves said, this man called Bosworth, who's one of Zuckerberg's senior lieutenant, he said that the Republican use of Facebook in the campaign was the best use of Facebook's targeting he has ever seen. So it's actually, I think there's been this story about Cambridge Analytica and kind of the idea of magic Jedi mind tricks. I don't believe that at all. I think that's rubbish. I think just what they did was they used the techniques Facebook make freely available, which are astonishingly precise. If you wanted to pick someone who lives in one particular area in Jaipur who likes Taylor Swift and Scotch whiskey and is under the age of 35 but over the age of 30 and is married, you could do that with Facebook's targeted advertising. They give a completely new... Yeah, there he is. That's a new thing in human history, that's a new thing in politics, that ability to, it's not mind reading, but it is to direct a specific message that no one else is going to see to one specific person, to not necessarily manipulate them, though possibly that, but to persuade them or cajole them or to make them frightened in ways that you already have reasons to think would work because you know things about them.
So I guess, and maybe someone else can answer this, but just playing a little bit devil's advocate here, I mean, it seems to me that what you're saying is, Facebook is a tool to better target what's already out there. And my point is, are we saying that the tool is the problem, or are we saying that the tendency that's already out there is the problem? And if so, and if it's the latter, sure, Facebook, should take some of the blame, but we should be looking at sort of like the broader systemic issues. At the end of the day, it's the people consuming the memes and liking the memes and sharing the memes. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in on that.
Sure. Look, I do tend to agree with you, Akash, that we sometimes do go overboard in blaming technology now for all our ills, and it's emerging as one of our favorite whipping boys. And taking off from the infamous slogan of the very infamous NRA, it's not guns which kill, it's people who do. But just the difference is that guns only kill. Okay, while in technology, I mean, you can use it either for good or for bad. And even within, when we look at technology, we tend to focus on these two things. Whenever we look at favorite whipping boys, we focus on the social networks, and we focus on this thing called AI, okay, or artificial intelligence. And we believe that it's going to come in, and it's going to be so much more powerful, and it's going to destroy everything. It's also going to destroy us. But the point is that both of these are really huge, massive, powerful tools that we have. And it's up to us whether we use it for good or we use it for bad. If you think of nuclear power, for example, it had the same conundrum. Okay, it's so many years back. I mean, we could have used nuclear power to destroy the world, but we used some level of regulation and mutually assured destruction, okay, to make sure that it wasn't happening. And so, so the same is true, and for both of these. And in AI specifically, one of my favorite quotes is that, I keep on looking around for artificial intelligence, and all I found was natural stupidity. What it really says is that it's actually us who's today building those AIs, and it's going to be dependent on us as to what really happens.
Well, and to add to that, AI, as we know, to the extent it's biased, is reflecting biases that are in the underlying data, which are the biases of our society, right?
But
I think
sorry.
I think that's absolutely one of the key points, because we sort of think that artificial intelligence is a piece of mathematics and is somehow value-free. And we don't realize that, of course, if artificial intelligence is learning on data, and that data has bias in it, then, of course, the algorithm itself is going to be biased. I did an event last year at Wired in London with a roboticist from MIT, Joy Bolawomani, and she described how she had some robots delivered to her lab, and they had some visual recognition software to be able to interact with the robot. And she took the robots out of the box, started interacting, and they just blanked her. Wouldn't see that she was there. And then she asked some other people to come into the lab. Some men came into the lab. The robots interacted with them quite easily, some other women. And then she realized the difference because she was black. And as soon as she put a white mask on, the robot started interacting with her. And when she looked underneath the bonnet of how this AI had learnt, the visual recognition software, of course, it had only been given images of white people, mostly male, to learn on. So she's now started an initiative called the Algorithmic Justice League, great title for a campaign, to really examine the learning process of an algorithm to make sure that we understand the kind of bias that might be in that data, which is generally replicating our bias, of course.
John,
But I also think there's a big point in the lag between where the technology is and where our understanding of it is. I think it's true that technology doesn't magically make us evil and doesn't magically make us think bad thoughts, but precisely because it's such a powerful tool, and people didn't really understand what Facebook could do until there were firstly scandals about how data had been misappropriated, and then you had surprising outcomes in elections which looked as if they were fairly directly linked to very astute social media campaigns. There's a time lag between what people who want to exploit the technology can do and between our understanding of it. And lots of bad things can happen quite quickly in that gap. And just to give an example, I invite everyone here, the next time you have a rapid internet connection, look at a website called This Person Does Not Exist. thispersondoesnotexist.com. And they're faces, they're artificially generated faces. It's a new technique which you guys would know about, called generative adversarial networks, GAN. And my understanding is that you have sort of two sets of network, one which sort of poses questions to a computer and the other one evaluates it. And it's the technique used by AlphaGo, is that right? DeepMind?
It's more a deep fake. Sorry.
Yeah, but interestingly, I'll talk about that on Sunday because it's been used in a very positive way as a creative tool because you get, you think about how the creative mind works, it's kind of explosion of ideas and then it has to critique those ideas. So that's a very nice example of how our own brains create a kind of generative adversarial network. The two networks in our brain, a very creative one and then a kind of discriminator algorithm. And that's what they're trying to use to create very powerful algorithms that somehow get better and better because they're sort of competing against each other.
And the point I'd make about these faces, please do look at it next time you get a chance. Thispersondoesnotexist.com. And every time you refresh the browser, you get a new, entirely convincing face, which is not actually a person. It's generated by an algorithm. And we are not prepared for that. We are not, as a society, ready for completely convincing, completely credible images of people who aren't real doing things which aren't real. If you think that the reach that we have of things that are actually true, there's a thing coming for which I think we're just not braced.
Right.
Yeah.
So, do you want to say something?
No, just a quick one. Also, it's also true that whenever a new technology comes in, it's the bad guys who catch it first. It's always. Okay, so if the internet was there and it had no business model, guess what? Pornography happened. Okay, or, the famous beta versus VHS. VHS won over beta because it could be easily pirated. And so, same thing is happening with blockchains today with the whole, and cryptocurrency rather, with the whole dark net, and similarly with...
Hold the mic. No, I think we need to be a little less negative about AI and big data because there are some awfully powerful things that it does for good. I think, how many of us came to the festival today using a navigation system on our phones? That only works to get us an efficient way because we all agree to share our data, and that helps us to find a very efficient way to get here. I think health data, I've seen examples in the UK, the National Health Service has a huge amount of data. Of course, we're all worried about that data being used somehow by insurance companies to rack up our premiums because they know things about us. But if properly anonymized, and I think that's an important point to come to a bit later, whether we can have anonymous data, but there have been amazing discoveries in kind of being able to treat diseases because of that huge database and the, you can do things at scale now in the medical profession that one doctor or one researcher can't do. So I think there are extraordinary benefits, and it's about, it's all been very negative up to now.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that we do realize that there are positives.
Right.
But I think the thing with the navigation system is that, and this is, we've had surveillance capitalism in the title, which of course refers to this book by Zuboff, who we've talked about data being the new oil. She very interestingly says, no, data is the new labor. And we're going through a new industrial revolution where we were giving labor away for a few people to become very rich in the industrial revolution, the Victorian times. Now we're giving our data away. We think we're getting services for free. No, we are paying for those services by giving our data. But the exchange, nobody realizes that what a bad exchange rate we're getting. And so there are a lot of calls to, regain our data, own our data, and somehow unionize ourselves as data users.
Right. So I actually want to come back to that question of the value of data. But it seems to me, you said a lot of the benefits come from the sort of sheer volume of data that we have. it seems to me that a lot of the benefits have also come from the very lag that you were mentioning. I mean, I've worked in media law, and this is a recurring trend where technology runs ahead of regulation, technology runs ahead of policy, and then eventually regulation catches up and tries to fix things. And in that lag, bad things happen, but it's also where innovation happens. It's also where breaking out of existing old legal strictures or policy strictures can happen. I mean, we can say plenty of bad things about ride-hailing apps, but they also have changed the world. They've certainly changed the Jaipur festival, where it's now possible to get a taxi when you leave this place. And that happened in that lag. That happened because technology allowed an innovation before policymakers started cracking down on it, which may be necessary at this point. So I just wanted to ask one of you if you could talk about that, the positive side of the lag. I guess I could ask the question this way: move fast and break things. One of the more vilified kind of slogans in the world at this point. But good things have come out of move fast and break things too, right? Anybody want to, or not? I mean, if nobody agrees, we can move on.
No, we can move on fast.
Move on fast.
No, it's a complicated one, so I would.
Well, yeah, but it might be worth teasing out some of the.
I mean, I think I spoke to that particular point, that I do think that there's, great opportunities in. I mean, the exciting thing is about scale. I mean, I went to a humanities conference that was using, say, AI to be able to read all of the Victorian novels that have ever been written.
Yeah.
I calculated that I can probably read 3,000 novels in my lifetime. There are, so many more novels have been written which are not being read anymore. And this AI is actually able to read at scale the whole of Victorian literature and start to pick out trends that we just can't see at our kind of scale. So I think that is the exciting thing. And again, we're seeing in healthcare, for example, the way that AI is spotting patterns and being able to read radiology scans and pick up cancers because of the patterns that it can detect. Yeah. But the exciting thing for me, and here I want another positive point, we're not going to get overrun by AI. It's not a competitor. I think it's a great collaborator. The data, and that's what we've got to try and capitalize on, is that actually doctor and AI together are the best radiologists. They spot a much better rate of cancer in a radiology scan than AI on its own or the human on its own. So I think there's a positive here about collaboration in this kind of context.
That's true in chess as well, that the most strong, a sort of medium-strength player with a powerful computer can beat anyone, and even beat the computer on its own. On the move fast and break things point, though, one of the things that really stayed with me, in 2013, the Guardian newspaper was given the Edward Snowden documents, which were destroyed by the British security services in London, but there was a copy in New York, which were protected by America's freedom of information laws. And the editor of the Guardian asked me to spend a week reading them, reading the secret documents to write a piece about them, to how they sort of seem to an outsider. So I spent a week reading the Snowden papers, and one of the things that most strongly came out of it for me was, the security forces, the organs of the state, were acting on as the beneficiaries of all this information that had fallen into their laps. And basically what had happened, it wasn't that society had collectively decided that we had new norms about privacy. I mean, I think surveillance capitalism, I think it's the core of it. That we suddenly decided that none of this stuff matters. That the idea that in the old days the police had to have a warrant to raid your house, but now they could have much more information than that whenever they wanted just by looking at your phone, and they didn't need new laws and they didn't need new provisions. It was just fine. And what had happened was that it wasn't that we collectively decided that the state should have all this new information. It's just life changed and it fell into the laps of government, states, police, security services. Yeah. And they kept quiet about it, and they're still reaping the benefit to this day. And one of the things that really struck me about it was the sense that people working in this field, both in the tech companies, in surveillance capital tech companies, it's very different from healthcare and things like that, in the surveillance capital side of it, and in the state, is that they're doing it because they can. You know, it's not, they just move fast and break things as a slogan, but there isn't even that much of an idea behind it. They're just doing it because they can. There's this cool new thing they can do, right. And they are going to do it completely irrespective until somebody comes along and sets up a new framework. And I personally find that frightening. I find Facebook in particular to be a company without a moral compass. It's completely amoral, and they often have retrospective justifications about connection and things like that, but actually they're just doing it because there's this really cool stuff that they can do, and if you occasionally have a massacre of Rohingya Muslims, say, you know, something like that, well, you know, that's just, okay, we moved fast and we broke things.
So I want to just move on to keep things moving a little bit here. You know, we've sort of talked about what the problem is and the extent to which it is a problem, and I think obviously, there is an extent to which it is a problem, and we can, you know, argue about how much of a problem it is. Let's talk a little bit about what society and what we can do about it. And I'd like to start by asking any one of you that wants to take it up, really. You know, as I said in my introduction, 2019, maybe 2018 were the years where we really started seeing regulators and policymakers kick into action. And particularly, we've seen, in the EU, we've seen GDPR, now we've seen the Consumer Privacy Act in California. And I just want to know what your views are on whether this kind of regulation is the right way to go, if we need more of it, or what your views are on this.
So, sorry. Go ahead. So look, you know, actually it follows from the move on and break things. I remember going to the Facebook office before it really became Facebook. It was this little thing behind an Indian restaurant in Silicon Valley, and as you entered it, there were these computer printouts which said move on and break things. Now, frankly, that was more from a how you work in a more agile manner. Okay, rather than those things being...
they didn't mean break the election
system.
Yeah,
US elections, or whether it being the European Union, which it later on turned out to be. But coming now to your question, couple of things here. So one is that I think the perpetrators, in some sense, or the people responsible, the owners themselves, have realized that this beast is far more powerful than they ever thought. Yeah, and so if you see the recent things, and they've kind of broken out of their Silicon Valley bubble, if it may, okay, where, you know, we can keep on doing cool stuff, or they're at least breaking out. And so while I do agree that from a Facebook viewpoint, it seems to be mostly retrospective, but say the CEO of Twitter, for example, reaching out to Elon Musk and saying that, look, how can I fix this mess? How can I make it what I originally wanted it to be? The famous Musk-Ma debates, or, you know, Bill Gates coming out in favor of regulation. And so you kind of see Sundar Pichai talking about a 5-year moratorium now on few developments within AI, and saying that, look, let's kind of figure out stuff first. And so I think real self-regulation, which goes beyond regulators, has started happening. That's one. Two is, sometimes, you know, what technology can destroy, another technology can recreate, in a sense. So, you know, if you look at these social networks, and, you know, now we look at them in a much more as evil empires, a dystopian view, etc., because they seem to be doing a lot more worse than what they were, and all this free data, plus the fact that content creators, most of which are sitting around in the audience, etc., don't get paid for their content. I mean, the new social networks coming up, the so-called social 3.0 or web 3.0 networks, which are hopefully going to make the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world obsolete, still at a stage where Mark Zuckerberg was in his dorm room writing those algorithms, okay, still at that stage, harnessing the power usually of distributed ledgers or blockchains and crypto to kind of create this new kind of networks, okay, where your data is going to be explicitly, permissions are going to be explicit, content creators are actually going to get content. So I think, and that movement has begun.
So just to clarify, what you're saying is regulation is not the only solution. The technology itself can
There's technology
can
and there's
a solution.
self-regulation.
Yeah. Well, you know, self-regulation, given like what we just saw with Boeing, sort of, you know, scares me as a concept. But I mean, like, my concern with regulation, it's another way of asking the same question, is like, it scares me that Microsoft, Google, Twitter, and Facebook are the ones calling for regulation now. I mean, why is Sundar Pichai pushing for regulation? Everything I hear from people I know and friends I know who work in startups says we can't comply with GDPR. I mean, we can't afford the lawyers, and GDPR is just one of them, right? I mean, every country is developing its own laws and regulations, and that level of compliance can only really be done by the big companies. And so my concern with regulation is, well, I guess there's another way to phrase the question. Is there a way to do regulation that enables innovation rather than locks in the market position of the big companies?
Yeah, I think there is. I think there's, oddly enough, I think there's a fairly simple regulatory fix for that. And you're completely right, by the way, because in finance, which I've written about too, the big banks love complicated rules because they prevent new businesses coming along to disrupt them. And we don't want to recreate that. So the things I would do, I would have a temporary ban on facial recognition, because I think that's a frightening technology. We don't know where it's going.
That's what Sundar Pichai is advocating.
Yeah, absolutely. I would break up Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram. I would separate Google from YouTube. Those are 5 of the 6 biggest signed-in apps and websites in the world. The other one is WeChat. And I would bring about portability of data. I mean, you own your own data. When you create this stream of digital data that Marcus was talking about, you actually have ownership rights to it. And that's portable in the way that in many countries your financial information is portable. If you want to change banks, you can just go along to the bank and you move all your account details and all the credit history, and everything gets transferred over automatically. And if our data is portable, it's much, much simpler to come up with new ideas, innovative ideas, and to get away from this situation when we have de facto monopolists controlling everything. I mean, one of the interesting things when Zuckerberg wanted to bring in free basics in India, and the Indian government said, no, we don't want this sort of half-baked, circumscribed version of the internet, and a board member of Facebook said this was like the kind of anti-colonialist policy that had done India so much damage. Now, what's the incredibly revealing thing about that? The incredibly revealing thing about that is the admission that it's a colonialist project. That's actually what it's giving away. And one of the ways in which we prevent the new colonists from being in power for as long as the old colonists were is we own that data and we can do what we want with it.
I think one needs to take that a little bit further and have an idea of a data commons as well, because our individual data on its own is not really worth very much. The point is about bringing it together. That's why we don't have much currency if I just tell, have my data about where I move around and where I go on. So it's about us bringing it together, and especially something like healthcare, our health data, to be able to have that as a collective, which then any company can buy, and we will get some sort of kickback off that use of the data. I think that's possibly the way forward to actually sort of make our data valuable as a collective.
And so I see this time, frankly, when like we have wealth managers today who manage our very complicated, complex financial, investments, etc., we'll have these data wealth managers, because as we are going around generating so much of data all around, all of this is kept in this one container, some of it is shared, and then there are these specialized data wealth managers who are maximizing the value of your data. Okay, investing it into the right places, selling it sometimes to the right place depending on what your, and so I think some of these things, and this is one job which AI is actually going to create rather than destroy. Okay, and so there are many, many possibilities, therefore.
I think another possibility is the fact that we can use cryptography personally to be able to protect our data. You can already have an email server which always sends your email in a secure way, and there you will have to agree with your person you're sending it to, and that is some way. And of course, it looks like WhatsApp now tells you that your data is encrypted as it goes across the network, which Facebook kind of celebrate. But if you look at it a little bit more closely, I think one of the reasons that you're getting all of those adverts is that there's a connectivity across apps on your phone that, yes, it is encrypted once it's sent out of your phone, but actually the apps are talking to each other. I think this is the case, such that your WhatsApp is telling your Facebook what's going on, and that's why you're getting all of these adverts. But it's giving you the illusion that your communication is secure. But I think that is a very positive way that we can personally take control of our data to find find ways to actually make it secure. The other one is, of course, to pretend to be completely somebody different digitally than who you are, and that really confuses people.
So, just, because there are a lot of specific proposals and ideas here, some of which are very interesting. But so, stepping back, I'd have two questions. One is these ideas of data commons or data portability or whatever. A, do these come about through regulation, or do we expect market forces to bring them about? And it seems to me regulation would end up having to play some role. And then the question is, how do you coordinate these approaches? Because one of the problems that we're seeing now is, as regulators are stepping in, we're getting this kind of fragmentation. And it does seem to me that you're going to need, in order for the internet to continue existing as a sort of seamless network and for data to be able to move around, we would like to have some coordination across the globe of these regulations. I mean, a data commons or a data market that's restricted to an existing legal jurisdiction is certainly less useful than a global data market.
I think it's almost the other way around, because I think the reputational damage caused by the recent scandals is so great that we are heading in the direction of a fragmented internet for a period anyway. Because as you say, GDPR is so difficult to comply with. Lots of American companies just aren't doing it in Europe now. China has an explicit version of a separate internet. Russia's just created a kind of new separated off internet. And I think the scandals and the disasters of the last few years have actually, that particular battle for the moment is I don't know if it's been lost, but it's certainly been lost.
Is that a problem, though? Is that a concern that we have?
So look, there are precedents, right? I talked about nuclear power, so many years back. And I mean, for people who are old enough, who were there that time, there was a fear to sleep at night because, who knows when a nuclear war would start. I mean, it was that bad. It was even worse than what we think, what we feel about data today. And that got, in some sense, regulated through global coordination. Okay? You think of space, okay, and the satellites, etc.
Jaspreet, I'm sorry, want to just say one thing because we're also running out of time.
Yeah.
But nuclear energy doesn't rely on global coordination the way the internet does. Right?
No, but that's the point. See, the other thing is, I agree. All I'm saying is there are models. You can't take that model and apply it precisely. The problem is, and why therefore we are all dystopian and cynical in many ways, is that at that time the world wanted to come together. Today the world wants to break away from each other. Okay, and so this whole feeling that you can kind of work together to achieve something actually isn't there, because whatever has been done, even coming together, the climate agreement, for example, people actually want to break out of it. And the one thing which we must remember is that however powerful technology is and whatever else it can do, it cannot exist in isolation of our society or social or what's happening in the world.
I do think there's one place that we haven't tackled where we need to try and think about regulation. You mentioned pornography being a driver. The other is the military. The military is often where new things get developed. And I think with facial recognition, the idea of AI weaponry and using data for weapons is truly frightening. And there's a big movement in the AI community to try and produce some sort of legal system such that there always has to be a human in the loop, or even to ban AI weaponry just as we do chemical weapons. The trouble is chemicals, they've got to be in a flask or something. This technology is so easily replicable, and it's very hard to keep it inside some glass flask. So whether this is even possible, but I think it's something that we really have to tackle.
And I completely agree with Marcus, and I also think that's another thing that people don't realize is already here. I mean, it sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, but you have drones, automated drones, killing people from targets from an algorithmically generated kill list using pattern recognition techniques. Shit.
Hear that? Yeah. You should watch what you say. Somebody's got their phone on and the message has been sent out.
I mean, it's something out of William Gibson. Algorithmically generated kill list, algorithmically generated targeting of individuals, and drones operated by someone in a cubicle in the Nevada desert, killing people in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's not science fiction, it's here.
Right. Do we have time for another question, or should we go to audience? We have time. I guess I just wanted to end, since this is a lit fest, we haven't talked much about, it seems to me whatever the solution is, kind of awareness building and getting the public involved is going to be part of it. And it seems to me that storytelling is going to be a big part of that. And it further seems to me that storytelling is very complicated here, particularly when it comes to data, and that these are pretty abstruse, esoteric, and dry and boring topics sometimes. Well, for many people, right? And so, I'd sort of like to know what your thoughts are on communicating these issues to people. I mean, you've written novels involving this stuff. Like, how do we get the message out there? How do we get people engaged and interested?
It's quite difficult to do in realistic fiction because it's actually quite boring to say, Nigel opened up his WhatsApp and scrolled through the list. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, cool. So I have actually, I've sort of written a thing about my book's coming out later this year. It's a book of ghost stories. It's called Reality and Other Stories, and it really came out of a feeling that there's a thing Arthur C. Clarke, great SF writer, once said, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And it seems to me that these things are, in effect, a form of magic. The idea that if you talked to me, 30 years ago and said, I'd be able to have a gadget that I'd be able to communicate with anyone in the world from wherever I was and get all the information in the world whenever I wanted, and summon transport for wherever I wanted, summon food for wherever I wanted, and it was completely free,
right.
I'd have said, well, you're describing a magic wand. You're describing a kind of supernatural phenomenon. And I think in a strange way what's happened is that these devices and the technology around us is so powerful that we're sort of living in Harry Potter world. We're living in an era of magic, and it's quite difficult to describe through realistic ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've seen some very interesting novels coming out this year, which are exploring the impact, and I think of AI and data on our lives. I mean, one of them, I interviewed Ian McEwan at the Hay Festival this year, and I think that's a very interesting exploration of why AI might be actually more moral than humans in making decisions, which can be really difficult. I mean, it's at the heart of that novel, Machines Like Us, or I wonder whether you had to pronounce it Machines Like Us, or no, it's Machines Like Us. And then you've got Jeanette Winterson also exploring the role of artificial intelligence. So I think it's a very important role that, of course, a literature festival can have in exploring the impact of these ideas on society.
Finally, an opportunity to plug my book.
Mm-hmm. This is the moment we've been building up to.
Absolutely. Now, look, the inspiration for my book came from this quote by an American philosopher who said that the world is not made of atoms, but it's made of stories. Steve Jobs talked about storytellers being the most powerful, and Anand Mahindra, a gentleman whom I worked for, said that no one else is going to save the world. The people who are going to save the world are actually storytellers. And one of the things I realized, and all of us do, is that some of these technologies are so presented in such an arcane manner, and they kind of just made needlessly complicated many times, that people, if you don't understand what these are, how are you going to even start thinking about them or working about those? And so, to plug my book, The Tech Whisperer, as my book is called, as the name suggests, the dog whisperer or a horse whisperer tries to talk about these technologies in a language which whisperers would use, and therefore one would understand. And so I completely agree that one of the ways to make this a much more of a debate where everyone participates in, and not only people who work in technology, is to actually make these understandable to everyone, and the best way to do that is through storytelling.
Okay, so we're going to move on to audience questions, but I've just been told that the sponsor contest winners get the first questions. All right? So we have two questions here that are, in fact, audience questions that have jumped the queue by virtue of winning the contest. And the first one is, the safest sites have been hacked. The question is by Meera Singh. And the question is, the safest sites have been hacked all over the world. How safe is net banking? And do you think we need multi-level security protocols?
Well, I think that as far as I know, that RSA, which is the thing which protects many of our sort of financial transactions, hasn't been hacked yet. But of course, probably GCHQ have hacked it already. But I think one of the emerging technologies, it's not been talked about much at this festival, but I just came from a festival in Munich, and it was the big topic, which is the role that quantum computing is going to have on the future. And I think this is going to hugely undermine security across the financial and global networks which use a kind of cryptography that is very vulnerable to quantum computing. So I think this is still very early days, but I think we're going to need new cryptography, which will be probably of a quantum nature to truly protect those sites that the questioner is talking about.
Okay, and the next question is by Pallav Sharma. I think it's a question we've pretty much addressed, but maybe somebody can just hit it again in a sort of succinct manner. Do you not think that data collection is an intrusion in one's privacy, in fact, a security risk?
I think it sort of is, yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Let's-
but. Yes, but.
Yes, but. Any two words?
I think that
Two
we
words?
have to be aware of what we're doing, and that's what we're not at the moment. As soon as we become aware about the data that we're leaving behind us, we become empowered. Knowledge is power.
And those companies do not have informed consent from their general users.
All right, so let's move to questions. How about the young man in the glasses sitting back there?
Good evening. My name is Amrit, and actually, I found very interesting. I want to ask a question based on a point which Mr. Jaspreet mentioned about how in India privacy is not really. It doesn't matter as much, and that is actually being used to, pursue propagate certain ideologies like through social media and all that. So I'd like to ask again, since we're in a lit fest, I'd like to ask. How close are we to an Orwellian world envisioned by in the book 1984, where you have telescreens and all that, where your data is being collected and your thoughts are being controlled in a manner, are being influenced in a manner in which you have no control over?
Right. So, John, you've already answered this question by talking about China. So we'll give somebody else.
I recently saw this interview with a person who had written one of the best biographies of George Orwell. And he said that thank God Orwell is dead, because if Orwell was alive today, what he presented, what he wrote, what he would see today would far exceed his expectations of what 84 was. I mean, a lot of the 84 stuff actually, I think, probably happened 10 or 15 years back, and a lot of it is kind of, so it's happening now. So in that sense, yes, many things which he wrote about in 84 are kind of par for the course now. Some of these are happening without us even knowing it. But how it goes on from here is actually not, again I'm repeating, is not as dependent on the technology, but as much on us who's actually shaping those technologies.
One of my worries is how malleable we are as a human species. I think John was quite kind to us, saying that it's the advert that's being put in front of us that we're responding to, but I think that we're being actually altered in our opinions. I remember reading Kahneman's Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, the experiments that he did there to show just how a number put in front of you could influence dramatically your guess at a particular question. I think that we are so much more malleable than we realize, and that's what people are taking advantage of.
Okay, so how about the lady here in the fourth row?
How as individual users do we prevent this? Like everyone is a part of this. These multinational companies, tech companies, these are new colonists, the government, and you talked about banning facial recognition, separating Google from YouTube, owning our own data, cryptography being an illusion, apps communicating with each other, but then tell me what, as an individual user, I can do to prevent this from happening, because it feels like being trapped, because they make it addictive.
That's a great question. What can one do as an individual
can I elaborate?
user?
Can I finish the question first? So with all of this information, they make it addictive. So do I isolate myself from social media, or what do I do as an individual user?
Do not isolate yourself from social media, because that make you immediately a target for the security services to come and see exactly why you've isolated yourself. So I think one of the policies that I've seen a lot of tech entrepreneurs talking about is how they actually create fake identities for themselves online. So they just confuse the system. So it doesn't know what you're doing. So, you will use the things that you like, but it's actually quite fun to sort of create your own persona online, which has nothing to do with what you are. So that's one way that I know that tech entrepreneurs kind of protect themselves a little bit by just faking their own identities.
I'm not on social media, and for exactly that reason, of thinking the cost-benefit was wrong. On the other hand, I'm of an age where that's not how my friends run their lives, and my kids, that's how they arrange meetups, how they plan everything, how they plan parties, things like that. So I can do it fairly cost-free, and the result is I don't. I think it's almost impossible. I think Marcus's idea is a great one, but I think it's incredibly hard to use those things without leaving that kind of slug trail of data behind you. Web browsing, there are things you can do. There are more anonymous browsers, and you can set the settings to maximum privacy. But social media, almost by definition, doesn't really have a private setting.
So, how about the man in the red sweater there with the glasses? Yep. Let's try to. I want to fit as many questions as we can. So let's try to keep the questions shortish.
Hi, gentlemen. I am a Gen Z guy. So yeah, I've paid $1,000 for this Apple iPhone, and still I can find, in spite of the Apple's claim that privacy, the ad tracker is built into it. And why am I still considered a permanent consumer of the ads market? Can I escape myself?
I think it's a similar question, but look, I mean, one of the things which, again, is an oft-repeated thing is that, look, if anything is given to you free, then you are the product. Because there's nothing free, really. And one of the things that's happened with the internet is that because, for whatever reasons, the way it evolved was that subscribers or users weren't really paying for services. So, and as it went on, we now frankly, we expect everything free from the internet. We don't want to pay for anything. Apps, premium content, New York Times articles. We don't want to do that. And so then, to run all of this, therefore a business model has to be there, and the business model which got developed was the ad-supported model. And it's just become better and better and better, and so therefore, it kind of now tracks you everywhere. And so in many ways, this fact that we refuse to pay for stuff basically means that we sell ourselves, little pieces of ourselves. And as we go further, I think this is going to change, and it's already started changing. And that's why the New York Times paywall, and it's kind of, people have now started paying for premium content. The new kind of social networks that I was talking about are going to come with this built-in thing that you pay for content, the freemium models where you pay something, and so it'll eventually also then again become your choice. And so if you don't want Apple chasing you, if you start probably paying for stuff, because at the end, the only thing that will make this change is if the business model changes, if there's a different way of earning money than these hyper-targeted, hyper-personal ads which are there today.
What do we have? One, two? Two more? Okay.
One
Let's try to...
One question.
Okay, sure.
See, as a personal individual, I am not worried about my personal data or losing money from my bank account. I am worried about the cyber threat on which nothing has been spoken. Now, recently leaking a cyber threat to Kalapakkam nuclear plant and ISRO computer, and somebody linking with the failure of our moon mission, where it last 200 meters, it has failed or something. I am worried about today in automation world where everything is moving around on digital world, whether it's an aircraft, whether it's a rail guide, whether train system, anything. If something happened to that cyber threat come to this system, whether it's even the nuclear plants anywhere, and someone comes up with this cyber threat, creates some havoc in the world, what will happen? How we can save? Like Israel armed forces have made their own own smartphone, made in Israel, app of Israel, nothing outside. Can every country go individual hardware, individual software? Not possible. So how to prevent that holocaust, which may happen any day? Someone can do it, maybe terrorist or maybe some other government, but how we will protect with the cyber threat? That's my question.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is a serious problem, and that's why decentralizing things is very important to be able to make sure that it isn't one place which is hit and therefore everything goes down. It's actually, I've got loads of CDs at home, and I wondered about just throwing my CDs away because, I have everything digitally available on my phone. And then I suddenly thought, what if suddenly the digital world collapses and all my friends who've thrown their CDs away will not have music? And books, physical books. All the things on my Kindle will disappear. So I think there's protect oneself with a kind of analog version of things as well as a digital version. But I do think, it is very dangerous. The way that Israeli technology was able to get into an Iranian nuclear plant just shows the power that, those who know are able to have an impact on this digital world.
Let's do one more. Can we go in the back? So people who are in the back aren't penalized for my bad eyesight. Just, I see somebody right there. Go straight, I think, right? The last guy. The last, as far back, yeah.
Good evening. Just wanted to ask Mr. Bindra specifically, because probably he'll know a little more about this, about the recent data protection bill, which has now become an act. Do you have any point of view or feedback on that?
Well, to be honest, I have lots of feedback and points of view on that. The only thing I would say at this stage, at a very high level, is that, for one, very frankly, for any government, however well-meaning, it is actually very difficult to get the right data protection bill which will make everyone happy. So GDPR, since it was referred to, is in a sense one extreme, and the European Union brought that, and from an individual protection of individual rights, it's almost as good as one can go. But then there's a whole lot of opposition to that, especially by companies and startups, saying that it's going to, as it was said again, it was going to stifle innovation. And so the data bill that has come out now is actually closer, in a sense, to GDPR than anything else. So it's far more protective of rights. On the other hand, there are some possibilities there that centralized, and I'm kind of using that word very carefully, centralized authorities can actually control control many parts of our lives just because of that bill, and so there's a huge backlash to stifle it. So so it's not perfect, and there's still lots of work which needs to be done. Again, I think just because of all the other things happening, remember, technology and society you cannot separate out, and because of the other things happening, a lot of it is being looked at with a very suspicious lens that through this means, do they want to centralize even more again? So that's what I would say here. There's far more layers onto it, which we can probably discuss offline.
Okay, sorry, that looks like that's the end. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the three of you for the fascinating discussion.
Our thanks go to Marcus de Sautoy, Don Lanchester, and Jaspreet Bindra, also to Akash Kapur for moderating the session. And this session was presented to you by Rajasthan Patrika, the Leadership Series. So Marcus de Sautoy and Jaspreet Bindra are happy to sign books. You'll find real books available at the JCV Prize for Literature bookshop, managed by Full Circle. That's to the left of Charbagh. You can pick up copies of their books there and then take them back here to the Nexa front lawn at the Z kiosk in the far right corner. You'll see it lit up with white and blue lights. That's the author signing area. So please do go and meet Marcus de Sautoy and Jaspreet Bindra there if you'd like to have books signed. And that wraps up the activities here at the Nexa front lawn for today. If you are still looking for entertainment, we have the Jaipur music stage in action from 7 o'clock, but that's not actually here. It's at Hotel Clark's Amir, which is about a 20-minute drive from here. At 7 o'clock, there's a performer called Lisa Marie Simmons. She's performing spoken word jazz and neo-soul. She says, I love the exploration of the spoken, sung, and played mingled. So she's part of a jazz ensemble called Note Speak with keyboardist, arranger, and songwriter Marco Cremascini. They're performing from 7 p.m. to 8:15 tonight. And then following that performance at 8:30 is Gavin James. Gavin James is a singer-songwriter from Dublin who has toured worldwide with Ed Sheeran and Sam Smith. He is one of the most followed artists online musically in the world, and his breakout single, Nervous, has gone multi-platinum. He was also a Spotify Spotlight artist in 2016. So those two concerts are back-to-back. The one ticket covers both. Tickets are 500 rupees, and you can buy those at Hotel Clark's Amir. And just to notify you that in case you aren't aware, in the mornings here at the Nexa front lawn, we actually start extra early and have a kind of slow and beautiful induction into the morning via, first of all, a 15-minute little yoga slot called Ekprana, tomorrow, which will focus on chanting and sound vibration. Then we have at 9 o'clock a classical music performance. So please do come and brave the cold with us from 8:45 if you feel drawn to do that before the literary sessions start. And it's that time of day when I run through the sponsors list, none of whom we could be without. The festival simply would not happen without an enormous, enormous number of sponsors. Z is our title partner. Nexa is the associate partner and venue partner here at the front lawn. Bank of Baroda is the venue partner for Betak. Motwani Jadeja Foundation is the venue partner for the Durbar Hall. Rajasthan Tourism is our tourism partner. The JCB Prize for Literature Festival Bookstore is managed by Full Circle. The Aga Khan Foundation is our series partner. Renket Ben Kaiser is an official cause partner. Diageo is a celebration partner. AirAsia, a travel partner. Kingfisher is a good times partner. Red FM is our official radio partner. Lonchora is our podcast partner. Be Live is our webcast partner. UFO Movies is our cinemedia partner. Save the Children is putting on book launches, and Pratam Books is our outreach partner. Series partners are the North India office of the US Embassy in New Delhi and the Mahindra World City, Jaipur. Session partners are British Council, Netflix, Etsy, Public Health Engineering Department, United Nations India, Avid Learning, Murti Classical Library of India, of Harvard University Press, Australian High Commission and Australia Council for the Arts, Paras Build Tech, Sahitya Academy, a Centre for Policy Research. Media partners are Dainik Bahaskar, Rajasthan Patrika, Amar Ujala, Business Standard, Inox, Mathrubhumi, Outlook Magazine, The New Indian Express, and The Tribune. Further sponsors, to continue the seemingly endless list, is Jan Mikulski, Zomato, DLF, Penguin Random House, J. Sri Periwal International School, Citibank, Storytel, CK Birla Hospital, LIC, Sotheby's, SBI, John L. Bissell Foundation, JW Marriott, Airtel, Karma Kettle, Grover Zampa, Coca-Cola, Gulmohar Lane, and it's not over yet, Hotel Diggy Palace for this wonderful, wonderful venue, Taj Rambagh Palace, Clark's, Amir, where the music and dance will be held tonight, Royal Opera House Mumbai, the Lalit, Full Circle, Yuva Ekta Foundation, Royal Treasure, EventBot, Edelman, Social Connect, McCain, Unibic, Wag Bakri Tea, Mastkin, Kanha Sweets, and Be Live. That is a demonstration of how many people it takes to put a festival together. We thank them all for their sponsorship and for helping this festival happen. Thank you and good night.